Massive thank you as always to our top tier patrons Sarah Turner and Alexander Lashley. It's Not Just in Your Head is hosted by psychotherapist Dr. Harriet, addiction and substance misuse disorder counsellor Ikoi Hiro, and myself, editor and producer Liam Tate. This podcast is entirely funded by listeners, and as the famous meme states, we are critiquing capitalism because we are forced to participate in it in order to survive. So if you can afford to support the podcast, then your contribution will ensure that we can keep making this show. However, if you can't, then please just tell your friends about us, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, and YouTube.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
We can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
Today we have two guests, Joshua Bryant, Jeremy Williams, and the topic today is the very difficult transition that people make between prison and rejoining secular society. And we are here to discuss all the issues that prevent a successful return to society and a lot of the systemic roadblocks in place that prevents people from being able to successfully rejoin.
I wanted to ask, what were the psychological burdens that you had leaving prison? Because prison is such a horrendous experience that I can't imagine that you don't come out with some particular traumas just from being there.
Yeah, myself, I've been diagnosed with like PTSD, social anxieties, things like that, just from doing the time that I did from 16 to 26.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's a really long time in what could be considered still, developmental year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I did 10 years from 26 to 36. I've been out for 10 years and I still have like prison nightmares 10 years later. It just doesn't go away.
Right, yeah. Various people spoke about that, is saying that, wake up, sort of cold sweats, sort of feeling like they were back there, or that was part of the dreams/nightmare. That obviously just sticks around, right? Like, I mean, in a much lesser degree, everyone has these sort of panic dreams where they go to school in their underwear or whatever. I assume this is like the same thing times 100.
Yeah. Typically it's, I'll have these anxiety dreams where I'm back in prison and nobody will tell me why. I can't get a meeting with anybody. I haven't been charged with anything. I'm just stuck there.
Wow.
That's it.
So it's like a complete lack of control over your own stuff, basically.
Right. Which is the biggest scourge of prison, because otherwise prison's not very interesting. It's just the fact that you have no autonomy that is this menace.
Yeah.
What seems to control people's level of trauma is feeling that they can do something about it. They can change it. And the passivity that's required in prison seems to be a unique kind of passivity. I wondered how it affected both of you.
There wasn't much, I guess, back in 99 in prison, and into the early 2000s. There was not much in there. If you worked in industries, you'd have to, be there for a long time. And, that helped, take your mind off of the situation and help to heal, I guess, in time, working, things like that. But, there wasn't much to do. So there was just a lot of hanging out, listening to other people's, stories and, trying not to become part of what prison is inside, I guess. And just trying to stay focused on something. I'm Native American, so I was able to go to, drummings or beading sessions or, things like that. So it was nice to have those type of outlets, but a lot of people don't have that in there. So it's a tough place, that's for sure. Some people go to church, some people do, a lot of people have visits, visits every weekend to take their mind out of there. But even that is kind of like, it kind of teeter-totters like, teasing, it's like, oh, here's a little bit of freedom, but, your people have to leave. I hear a lot of those stories, people back, and be like, oh, just, it makes me mad that they come, but yet I love that they come. So it's a lot of mental anguish in there and stress and issues. Yeah.
It's also, I would imagine, a burden on the visitors and on the people that care about you to see you in that shape.
Oh yeah, of course, especially like my mom. Yeah, it was hard on her, especially having, to go in there and then feel like they're an inmate too, because they're treated about the same way. They're always rude to my guests, and that would come up. And yeah, so yeah, it was tough on everyone and everybody, and it still is,
Well, how do people sustain themselves psychologically and keep themselves from just going mad from the helplessness and isolation?
Some people don't.
They just go and see. We have a mental health facility for that. It's called SOC. It's where people go that just that don't have any outlet, that just allow it to consume them to the point where they're like, they have to stay in a cell 23 hours a day, and a lot of them live within their feces. They throw it all over themselves. They turn into animals, is what I see. We turn back into the animalistic original nature, I guess. I don't know.
Is it different from solitary? Because that sounds like solitary.
It is a lot like solitary. Yeah. I mean, there's a step down program, in time if you work their program, but I've heard their program's pretty, open ended. There's no real structure within that program. And a lot of the doctors that go to that facility are in and out all the time. Like they're always, they never stay very long.
Mm.
Yeah, and I imagine it's a soul sucking job for a therapist, because even I did a lot of mental health when I was in prison, and even the good therapists that I had in there still had their hands tied by DOC policy. They couldn't do their jobs the way they had envisioned doing them when they decided to get these degrees and these certificates to help people.
Right. And I can imagine all these, one of the things that I do constantly hear from people who have experienced at least several years or more in prison is how much basic skills deteriorate, even in terms of like employable skills.
Yeah, it's like time for that time, you don't, everything freezes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because it's not like you necessarily get to practice that in prison. Right.
And I don't know about Joshua, but it's not like I went in with a whole boatload of employable skills.
No, I had to work McDonald's, because I was a minor. So it was like a couple hours a day, So no, I didn't have really any employable skills when I got out.
Yeah. I didn't have any employable skills. I didn't have any life skills. And
no life. Didn't know how to shop. Didn't know nothing about a bank account. They didn't help you with anything. They had a thing called credit. I don't know if they have that anymore, but it was it didn't help anybody. It was there for nothing. I don't know what it was for.
Right. And it sounds like the whole sort of prison model's just based off, it's just pure punishment, right? Opposed to any sort of rehabilitation.
Yeah. Any person that betters themselves in prison is because they chose to do it in spite of being in prison, not because of any correctional programs in the prison.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Susie Schwartz has a very good book called Dreams from the Monster Factory. She was a defense attorney for people who she got out of prison, and then they'd go back in, and then she'd try to get them out again and so on. And she created a kind of prison system which actually was 75% effective in reducing recidivism, but they didn't continue it, where there were no people in bars, and the wardens and the inmates ate together, and everyone had to be in education classes and in therapy groups, and it worked really well, and it was discontinued.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that would have helped keep up your morale, especially as a young person in that awful system?
Oh, yes, of course. It would have made me feel like a human being instead of an animal. I mean, that's really how I felt when I first got there. I felt stockaded. I felt, just because I was a minor going in, so they didn't have an implementation on how minors were to be dealt with within the adult prison system at that time. So they threw me in IMU as soon as I got there because they didn't have anywhere to put us. And then
What's
they kept
IMU?
us there. It's an intensive management unit. You're in there for 23 hours. Yeah, it's lockdown.
Oh, horrible.
So, yeah, I was punished right out the gate. And then after that, they shuttled us up to Clallam Bay Correction Center, which is a closed custody facility. And at that time, the murder and assault rate at that facility was the highest in the state, even higher than So yeah, as soon as I got there, I mean, they were on lockdown, I believe, at the time because there was a stabbing. Yeah, and all the guards were just they're very cold. There was no happy, there was no smiling, there was no even to make you feel like a human being. There was none of that. I mean, yeah. Department of Corrections in Washington State. Yeah, I don't know if they train them to be that way, but that's just how they end up. Yeah, they just are very cold. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a certain kind of person that applies for that job.
Yeah.
And I think that it just kind of naturally attracts people who are okay with looking at human beings in cages all day and just kind of being okay with that.
Yeah.
That's not something that most people would sign up for, regardless of what they think about crime and punishment or any like idea they might have about what to do about criminals. Most people could not physically do that and be okay with it.
Right. There are entire towns where like that is the only well-paying job.
Yeah, Clallam Bay. I was there. It was a constant lockdown. Yeah, but there's nothing else to do up there.
Nothing but fight.
Work in the prison. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always dark, rainy, and the guards are all loggers. So
yeah.
They're big.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So a lot of the former corrections officers were former loggers.
Yeah, because logging went away in that area.
Yeah, and they had to make a living somehow. And well,
correction.
It is. Yeah. Nobody just moves to Clallam Bay because they're excited about being a corrections officer. They live there. They're from there, and they still have to make a living. So
yeah.
And you were, Joshua. You said you were sent to an adult prison as a juvenile. Is that correct?
That is correct. But at Clallam Bay, they did have a special unit, D unit, that was used for the youth offender program. And they kept everybody under 18 there. And as soon as you turned 18, then you would progress into population. But by the time you turn 18, you know everybody in population. You see them in the breezeway. You talk to them at the laundry. You see them at different services, so they integrate with us all the time. So that's how the YOP system there worked. And they did have us going to high school, which was through Eagle Crest High School is what they called it, which is a derivative of Clallam Bay School District, I guess it was. So they did have us doing that. So they really did program us and keep us busy in YOP. But again, there was always fights and there was always stabbings and there was always this and that going on. Because there was some downtime. So that was the time usually when everybody would want to get riled up. Or in the chow hall.
When you say there's stabbings, how did people have access to knives?
Well, that's a funny thing. They make it out of anything. It could be, you could take a bunch of plastic and melt it down, because at that time you could have cigarettes in the prison. So they had matches, and they got them to us. The prison guards were really good at bringing stuff in and giving it to us. They were pretty bad themselves. So a lot of things were happening that probably wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the help of the staff there.
Did they bring them in for money or altruism, so to speak?
I believe it was for notoriety. A lot of the guards there, enjoyed being like the cool guard because they were young. Yeah, they put the young officers over in the youth offender program. So we would get all the young people coming in. So they always wanted just to kind of be cool and be part of the in crowd kind of thing. So they weren't really like normal officers in that unit at that time. But they don't have that anymore. They abolished that whole program because obviously it was totally against everything. And then they just have everybody stay at Green Hill until they turn 18, which Green Hill is a juvenile facility.
Michael Moore in his movie, What Should America Invade Next? Mm-hmm. has a depiction of prison in Sweden where mm-hmm. people are doing regular jobs that they're trained for and talk to one another and are among everyone else. And it seems to really work well so that they leave prison with a trade that they can ply and make a living, and with a lot of understanding of what got them in trouble. Did you get any understanding of whatever landed you there?
Unless you wanted to find that understanding yourself, there was no like assistance in that. It was more like shame counseling, putting you down kind of stuff. There was no like building anybody stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lot of look what you did. Look what you did. It's like, well, I know what I did. You're not helping.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of commonalities in some of the treatment that people receive in prison and the treatment that people receive in these kind of like quote unquote rehabilitative, troubled teen industry.
Mhm.
Horrible, yeah.
Yeah, that there's quite a similarity between the two, and the therapeutic approaches of a lot of facilities in both those sectors is kind of the taking people down to bring them up. I guess it's called therapeutic community, except there's no bringing up.
Right.
It's only the takedown part, right? I mean, to a certain degree, there is a lot of drug rehabilitation, residential drug rehabilitation that does rely on this model. But I feel like these kinds of therapeutic treatments make people worse. And also I think it makes, like carrying that level of heavy shame that hasn't been properly processed and understood, I think really makes for a huge difficulty in, once you are back in society, in building relationships with, yourself as well as other people.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
If mental health is about connection, about honest connection, then we are really relegating people who we throw into prison, usually people who don't have enough money for a good lawyer. I think that the United States, which has the biggest prison population in the world, has enormous weaponizing and hurting people. And I don't know what effect the capitalism has on this. I know there's a huge prison industrial complex, which, because I had a client who worked with recently released offenders, and she said she'd go to these huge conferences with providers from the military industrial complex with all of these new restraining techniques and weapons, and it was terrifying. I wonder if you experienced that, how some people were profiting over treating you like an animal.
I mean, I literally experienced that. I did 5 years almost in private prisons. Washington State sent me out of state to get housed in private facilities that were just run for profit. So,
yeah, with no idea of rehabilitation, that seems like such a sinful thing to do. Profit over other people's misfortune and do nothing to help them.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I won't get too far in the weeds, but I think the United States kind of carries that as a badge of honor in most of the things we do, profiting off of human misery. It's just kind of our brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's capitalism's brand that the idea is to make money, and if you do it at the expense of other humans, that's a collateral damage.
Yeah,
Right.
they put a lot into the people too, and the news media and stuff like that I've noticed. While I've been out here the last 20 some years, it's just been I noticed the news media likes to hype a lot of things up, and it likes to scare the people. The people vote in these people that go and get all this money towards this and throw money at that, and it just never seems to work. It's just throwing money.
Yeah.
How did you see it operate in your own experience as a prisoner? Or did you make that direct equation? I don't know.
I made that equation after I've been out a while out here. Inside, I knew nothing. I was oblivious from the outside world. Inside, I was just, everything in there kind of consumes. You're consumed by the whole prison environment. But like we said, if you have those outlets, and those outlets give you a few minutes or a few hours maybe of release, I guess it would be. But after that, in that, that cloud of prison, and it's just negative and it's drama and it's awful.
Did the library play any role for you or others? And do they have a decent library so at least you could read?
Yeah, depending on what facility you're at, each facility had a different type of library. But yeah, most of the libraries were pretty nice into. They were lacking, I guess, in a lot of books. But as I was getting towards my time to get out, they had that interlibrary loan thing where you could like get books from all sorts of different little libraries in the area. So it opened the horizons for different books and being able to get stuff in that was never able to be brought in there unless you had it bought and sent into you. Because you can do that with books sent into you. But yeah. So yeah, the library is a good place to go and have some quiet time for a few hours. But again, as soon as that bell rings and everybody says, yard in, it's, reality comes back.
I was wondering, Harriet, in your description of the prison in Sweden, how would that sort of stuff go down in America generally? Because the vibe I get from reading and watching things is that the prison thing is like this sort of institutionalized, agreed upon form of punishment for, I use religious term, sinners, right? And that any sort of allowance that towards prisoners, how accommodating do you think the general population are towards the idea of rehabilitation versus just sort of outright punishment?
A lot of people understand some basic psychology is really lacking in the United States, just in the basic way of because drug treatment and the prison industry are very closely aligned in
yes.
And how people think about one of the most common things that's often said, in regards to people that are struggling with drug use is that they need to hit bottom. That's a very, very common, and that's basically just, people have this idea that negative reinforcement works, right? That's a huge part of why a lot of quote unquote, decent people think prison has a deterrent, kind of function. And that's not necessarily true because, if
not at all.
If death penalty, quote unquote, supposedly has a deterrent function, but, the death penalty does very little in terms of mitigating any kind of, major violent crime. So there's this idea that, these, if you make these places a pleasant place to be, that it wouldn't deter crime.
And that cultural idea then, Jeremy and Joshua, did you carry that into your experience when you first went in there or during your time there or even reflecting on it? Did you feel like, I deserve this punishment or X, Y, Z, or that, I have to go through this sort of process of, as you said, equally hitting bottom or something? What's your feeling on all of that, if that's not too much of a scattered question?
I didn't feel like that at all. I mean, so I tend to think a little bit differently. When I went in, I never had the thought of whether I deserved it or not. My thought was, is this useful? Right. And the answer is a resounding no. It's okay, well, whether I deserve it or not doesn't really matter if I'm in this situation and it's just going to make things worse. What are we doing? Because then the question becomes, do the people who I'm going to be releasing into society, do they deserve it? That's a snowball that just keeps going and going and going. It's well, at some point, we're going to have to stop that and say, okay, we're going to stop asking the question of whether or not the next person deserves it and figure out how we can do things better. Unfortunately, I think that if we tried to implement one of those models in Sweden or Norway, I think generally, I think the public would lose their damn minds, honestly. Right. I think they would absolutely have a fit if we tried to do something like that with their taxpayer money. I don't think it would fly at all.
Right. Sorry. I just wanted to make a clarification really quickly. Which is that this idea of hitting rock bottom is not something that's imposed to others, not something that people impose to themselves necessarily.
Of course not.
Right. So I just wanted to clarify that point. But going back, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jeremy.
Oh, that's all right. If nobody interrupts me, I will talk forever and be really annoying.
Well, you haven't annoyed us so far, so keep talking.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought. We're good.
Oh, sorry.
But
Sorry.
I think it's the taxpayers' money thing, because that's certainly something I watched one documentary where they had this in prison dance competition. I think it was maybe a ladies' prison, not to be sexist, but that's what it was. I think, and
it's segregated by gender. So.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I it sounds almost like a Will Ferrell movie if there would be like a dance off in a male prison, but maybe that's just me being small-minded. But the point being that the prisoners had something to look forward to. They're having a good time, bonding with each other. They're not stabbing each other. And she was saying, this program has been really effective. It has done X, Y, Z thing. It actually helps with skills about when you get outside into the job market as well, because it's sort of person-to-person skills and all this kind of stuff, because you have dance partners and all that kind of thing. Obviously, the video went into more detail. But the point being is that even if the reality is that is true and there are these sort of measurable benefits, that's why I sort of come back to that cultural idea of punishment. It's like, how do you get over that? Because exactly what you said about taxpayers, that seems to always be something that, like, every argument gets condensed down to that. Yeah, but I'm paying for it and fuck you, That seems to be the vibe.
And they never realize that they're paying more for what they're getting now. It's like, okay, well, if you're worried about what you're paying for, at least pay for something that gets results.
I agree with that. I don't think it's what they're paying for, because they're paying much more for incarcerating somebody for a year at Rikers Island prison than they would be if they gave him an apartment and paid his college tuition. So that's much more expensive. I think that probably partly it's the profit motive, and partly there is a kind of dualistic religious thinking that you're either of God or of the devil, good or bad, that doesn't understand the complexity of human beings.
Yeah, I just think the taxpayer thing reveals something, which is that even if you can win the economic argument, saying actually if you spend money this way in rehabilitation stuff, it doesn't matter, because ultimately the taxpayer thing is just a front for a moral argument, which is like, I don't like that money is being spent that way. It's not about the money, really. It's about how you think, with whatever experience you have, other people who have committed a crime should be treated. And that, I don't know, Joshua or Jeremy, if you have thoughts on that, or like how that gets combated, or just that's too big a problem. Fuck that.
Well,
you just got to deal with your own stuff.
So the thing is, it's here's the problem that you run into, is that taxpayers are willing to spend any sum of money to keep the thing that they are afraid of at bay. And so even if you could show them that spending this money gets better results by doing such and such and such, the hard sell for them is that part of their brain that's like, yeah, but I'm afraid, and I'm willing to spend whatever it costs to make sure that what I'm afraid of is away from me. And so that I think the economic argument is not invalid, but it can't be the only piece. At some point, people have to be shown that a lot of what they think and a lot of what they believe is just false. And the problem is, people hate that. People don't like being told they're wrong about anything. So when you get the I don't like being told I'm wrong, and I'm willing to spend no matter what it costs to keep the thing that I'm afraid of away from me, you get a pretty nasty soup from that.
Right. So it's a certain kind of NIMBYism.
Exactly. And the problem is that there's a lot of very good people out here. I don't mean to paint everybody with that brush, but the people who plant their flag in that ground tend to not budge and tend to be very loud. So it's an uphill battle to try to reshape a lot of those thoughts, a lot of just complete fabrications and misconceptions about how people end up in prison and what the system looked like. And there's just, it's almost impossible to find somebody who hasn't been through it, who actually has even a cursory grasp of what it actually entails. They don't know.
Right.
Yes,
I mean,
and they don't know for a reason.
And presumably you come up against this not only when you're in prison, but when you then leave and have to find housing or a job or any of this stuff that you need for life. Presumably you come face to face with this sort of set of ideas that are running in people's minds, you know, potential employers, potential landlords, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know if, sorry to derail it into that direction, Ikoi. I don't know if you or Harriet, you had further questions around all of that stuff, but I was sort of interested in going in that direction of what that, you know, that transition into
absolutely,
you know, a civilian life. I don't know what the fuck you call it, but
I do want to segue into the transition difficulties. But one of the major issues with, you know, kind of like the public thinking around crime is, you know, because it's not even that people quote unquote make mistakes, right? But that a lot of times people are kind of, you know, being forced into situations in life where there are very few good options, you know, that people. Oh, go ahead.
I like to reiterate to people that nobody wakes up one day and says, you know, I really love my life. I've got a great house and my wife's amazing. My kids are, everything is really going my way. I think I'm going to go out and commit a Class A felony. That's never happened. Nobody does that. People commit these crimes after a long stretch of intense dysfunction. This isn't something that happens. And that's why I tend to lean away from even the, you know, do you deserve it? Because how far back do you have to reel that in before it's like, well, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where like this whole concept of deserving is actually what prevents a lot of reform.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, right? Because, you know, one of the issues that the death penalty, you know, I'm 100% against the death penalty. And one of the things that, you know, is difficult is that like there's always some kind of crime that people will think is deserving of that. Yeah, having worked in mental health for a long time, I also think that the public has a huge issue with understanding, you know, this idea of free will. Right, because we don't really have free.
No, we don't.
I really don't think that, you know, at least the Western colloquial idea of free will is actually rooted in any kind of evidence at all.
No.
Right, it isn't. And in New York, about 5 years ago, they did this study of where do the people in the prison come from. It turned out in the New York prisons, a majority came from 7 square blocks in a slum in New York City, because the conditions in those blocks were so desperate that people's only entrepreneurial opportunities were in illegal activities.
Yeah. Everybody can only make the choices they're equipped to make. Like,
yes.
Right.
That's it. That's what you have in front of you. These are the choices that I'm equipped to make. I got to pick from these. But it's a rational choice.
Yes.
It's
I mean, a lot
thing
of
to
crime
do.
is rational choice.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that is really important to, you know, to bring to the conversation in discussing the idea of crime in society is that, you know, most people have this idea that, you know, people are given positive opportunities and that they willingly take this negative route.
Yeah.
When that is absolutely not the case. You know, one of the issues that like I've run into talking to a lot of clients is that, you know, for some of the younger clients, you know, that have gotten themselves into the criminal justice system, you know, one of the things is like, they're like, you know, like we see people, you know, in our lives that like try to lead a quote unquote safe and like, you know, law and order kind of life, and they fail a lot. Right. It's not like you see success stories
That's
necessarily,
right.
even if people that like try, you know, like one of the things that one of the clients had said was that, you know, there was this like one kid, you know, in his high school that kept his head down and tried to do to, go to college and everything. He ended up going to college, like becoming like, extremely overwhelmed, and ended up coming back, failing out of college because he developed a drug problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That there's this idea that if you just keep your head down and do what you're supposed to do, that you
right.
society, right? Which is absolutely not true.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the things of because going to, having this conversation with the public on this issue of deserving or not deserving of it is kind of a losing battle. And, how I always try to talk to the public about this concept of crime is the plain fact that most people have no good choices in life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That they're not picking from a good choice and a bad choice, but that, systemically, there are so many situations where the bad choices are and also rational choices.
Mm-hmm. Under circumstances.
One of the documentaries I watched, this lady who had got into, I guess, a very violent fight in a nightclub, her way of framing what happened in her time in prison was that she said, well, maybe I deserved some punishment, but I didn't deserve abuse.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it sounds to me that, there's maybe this judgment for the crime and doing, facing some time for that. But then once you are facing that time, what happens during that period? It doesn't sound like that, doesn't sound like it works. And it doesn't sound like anyone wants to fix it, because it's not about whether it works. It's about just some, like you said, I think fear. What is the process? Then you leave, and then, how quickly is it? Or, is there any sort of anything provided? I mean, I probably guess the answer, but is there anything sort of provided as a bridge between prison and, housing or work or food or anything?
Well, not zero, but not a lot. So as far as housing goes, I can only speak to my experience on this. I'm in one state. The U.S. has a patchwork of different ways they run their prisons across the country. In Washington, when I got out of prison, DOC was offering housing vouchers that would pay for your rent for 3 months. That's up to 6 months now. But even then, that presupposed that a landlord out there would accept those vouchers. And then there was obviously SNAP, so there was some assistance with food. So presuming there was a landlord that was set up to take those vouchers and a person could get on SNAP, at that time, I also had benefit of Obamacare had recently passed. So I was all right. As for the first 3 months, I was okay because I had some housing vouchers and some food, and it's the bare minimum at best, because 3 months of housing vouchers, what happens when those run out? 3 months is not a sufficient amount of time for somebody who just did a decade in prison to get on their feet and be prepared to start paying for their rent. That's a ridiculous notion.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky because I had quite a bit of family support to pick up that slack, but that's not common.
Right. I mean, the prison system and the kind of the transition thing, because I know a lot of states don't even offer housing vouchers. So that is a state by state kind of case. But, in terms of people, getting out of prison and returning, would you say that it's those kinds of lack of social support that lands people back?
It's the first thing they trip over, for sure. It's the first thing they trip over. You can't successfully reintegrate into society in 3 months, and you can't successfully reintegrate into a society that insists that you ought to be homeless.
Right.
Those are ridiculous propositions. Anybody who thinks that that's reasonable is just out of their minds. So those are the first things that people trip over, frankly. If you can get through the first 3 months and make it to month number 4, you're doing okay.
Yeah, but also they haven't given you it. They have robbed you of your survival skills in prison. I mean, one of the things is there's nothing to prepare you for your release and functioning. So you don't come out. In Sweden, everyone has some kind of a remunerative job waiting for them. I don't know how you can release people when you've actually been training them in passivity and not having skills in getting a job or in keeping one and having marketable skill.
Well, I mean, even if you develop a marketable skill, for example, a lot of people learn firefighting in prison, but a lot of times they are not allowed to be firefighters once they leave prison.
All those people who volunteered and helped put out the California fires and risked their lives in prison, they couldn't get any credit for firefighting experience or instruction.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, having any kind of felony disqualifies you from firefighting for a lot of work. I guess they're trying to change that. I don't know how much that is going. But
Joshua, did you have similar experience? And were you given vouchers for anything, or what was your
or a marketable skill?
In 2006, nothing was available at that time. So I had family, luckily, and they paid for me to live in a hotel for about 3 months. And then after that, I had been working. I worked for JCPenney's for a few years. And then, so I had to do it all on my own. I mean, there was no help, no nothing.
Wow.
So, no vouchers, no such thing.
Yeah, I had seen or read that it was the first month was often, that first month out of prison, more often than not, people would end up, like you said, making ultimately rational choices, but they would reoffend because, there's no support network, there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. And then, back into it. So,
yeah, prison is a reasonable alternative to homelessness. I mean, it's a rational decision. It's a shitty one, but if you're looking at your only two options being going back to the thing that you're familiar with or being homeless, a reasonable person can make that decision.
And the opposite has already been proven in New York City now. Our mayor, who in my opinion is a strutting turd, has decided, because he used to be a cop, that what we need to stop crime in New York City is more police. Well, crime has gone up 22% this year, and there's many more cops, many of them beating people too. But that there's all anyone has to do is the research to see that punishment and violence don't really help, so that it becomes an educational mission has to be created here with more than a few well-meaning groups, but with a huge effort.
Yeah, what is that process then of finding either work or a landlord, or how does that work? Is it just like a trial of just rejection, or what's been your experience with that?
I got lucky. So by the time I got out, they had the vouchers, and by the time my vouchers ran out, I had already started transitioning into a job. I had an elderly friend at the time who needed somebody to stay with her and do things around the place. She was in a wheelchair and just couldn't do things anymore. So I kind of slid into a caregiver job that I was at for the next 3 years. For most people, it's a lot of applying for jobs and not even like getting that door slammed in their face. So in a lot of ways, I was about as fortunate as any person has ever been coming out of prison, honestly.
Yeah, the thing that I found difficult to comprehend in sort of various different little short documentaries, I watched some on Vice and all that kind of stuff, is people who'd been locked up for a very long time, like 4 decades and stuff like that. Some of them had said that they sort of made peace with their anger. And they're just like, I'm not thinking about the past, I'm just sort of focused on the future. But given for you, Jeremy, that you feel like yeah, that process, that transition from prison into regular life, that if you feel like other prisoners have had it harder, like how have you then, even if you can register like, oh, maybe I've got has been a bit easier than others, how have you sort of dealt with, like, man, that was 10 years of my life? Is it just sort of like, yeah, that's in the past and I'm focused on the thing that's right in front of me, or like, what is that?
Not even remotely. I still haven't come to decent terms with my anger. But no, there's no, I'm not sure there's going to be a point where I can just say, okay, that's all in the past. Everything that we experience, we kind of drag along with us, good and bad. But no, it's constant weekly therapy sessions, and I see 2 shrinks. No, that's now in the past, and I can just move forward. I do tend to be a fairly forward-looking person. But yeah, I'm dragging a heavy thing behind me while I yank myself into the future. I'm also very stubborn and very optimistic. So those 2 things really help me. But no, that's in the past, and I can just lay that to rest. I don't, there might be some people for whom that's a thing. That's not a thing for me. So.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Joshua, did you have any things you wanted to add to that, your own experiences or any stuff?
Just getting over the, being able to, not think about, hanging on to anger and things like that for myself. I've divulged, the last, I don't know how many years, working in reentry. So I'm constantly working with Department of Corrections, Department of Social Health Services, the state, whoever it is, I need to work with, to get somebody, a solid reentry plan and try to get them housing. I do work for a organization that has housing. So, that's how I heal, or I've started to heal myself from all the trauma that I've endured over those years. And, not so many years ago from now, there's been trauma, through life, just other things. So, so this type of work has really started to heal me and make me feel like I'm finally on the right path doing what it is I need to do, because I love doing what I do.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess maybe there's some sort of idea of like some common wisdom that anger is a bad thing, but I assume it can be like a fuel for an engine, right? Like, but just negative fuel,
It's a fuel for me to make sure that reentry is solid in this state. That's my activism.
Yeah, but there's a lot of righteous indignation. I don't even think I mentioned this when I was mentioned the podcast, but Josh and I both work in reentry. I refer people to him all the time. And that anger does help to fuel a lot of what I do in my work. And it's also been good because I don't think 2 days go by without me being on the phone with somebody at DOC. And it's kind of helped me to get to the point where I don't just hate everybody that works for DOC. Yeah. I'm like, some of you are actually decent people trying to do your best. They are there.
Right.
It's that it's that saying, isn't it? Be kind with people and ruthless with systems.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Mm.
Right.
They've even tried to coax me into working for DOC a couple of times, and I'm like, I've thought about it even. I'm like, oh, Jesus.
Well, since you both work in reentry, what do you think are some of the public policies that could be done? Because at the very least, right, what we should be doing is allowing people that, get out of prison a real chance to successfully make the transition into society and lead, happy lives. And what do you think would be some of the things that, like, in terms of policy, that would really be helpful?
Oh, housing, more housing for
Straight up.
yeah, more housing.
Like
I'm
guaranteed housing.
Yeah, guaranteed housing for everybody with a felony, not just certain felons, every felon. And also, better chances at true gainful. I have, hundreds of thousands of leads for employment for people with felonies, but it only goes up to $25, $26 an hour. Some of them are apprenticeships. They go up to $35 an hour. But, to live in Seattle, to live in King County, you have to at least make $40 to almost $50 an hour now to really survive as being a single person. So, I believe housing, employment, and definitely resources like bus passes, clothing vouchers, out and they don't have
Clothing
money.
vouchers is actually really big.
Yeah, clothing vouchers is huge. Going in for an interview, you have to have a nice outfit, and a lot of these people, they don't have the money or the means to do that when they get out. So clothing vouchers, bus passes, getting them to and from their interviews or to and from DOC. Make sure that they have to be there at certain dates, but sometimes they don't give them bus passes. They're out. And that's usually the thing I hear all the time. Oh, they're out of bus passes, And so these people, sometimes have to miss, and then they violate them, because they can't get to where they're going. So definitely resources, housing, and employment are my three huge goals and issues that I always bring up to the senators when I go to visit them in Olympia. So
yeah, I get a lot of phone calls and text messages from people saying, I can't make it to such and such a place. I can't make it to such and such a place. So I'm glad that I just bought a hybrid, because I do a lot of driving to make sure, because I don't think that people should get violated for something so silly. You know what I mean? It's like, especially since the probation officer has a car. Once you come out, like if you need to see this person, like, why does it have to be in your office? But yeah, housing is the biggest obstacle that I run into with people who reach out to me. And frankly, I know it's not glamorous. Money, straight up money.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
people need money. The organization that I work for, we've got a care closet, so we can set them up with some clothing. Again, I drive people around a lot, but for a lot of the people on my caseload, we just give them money. It's not a lot, but it's better than zero. I mean,
yeah,
right.
People need money. It's just, like there's no workaround for that. There's no good intentions that get over that hurdle.
Absolutely. In France, if you go for a medical appointment, because they have really good public medical insurance, not only do you not have to pay, but if you had to go on a vehicle, a bus or a train, they'll pay you back for your transportation. Because, of course, if people need things, they need to be able to get to where the things are.
And just like housing, the cost of cars have just exponentially increased every
cars, gas, and the U.S. has very little good mass transit.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the problems is that, I mean, when we talk about policies that we can implement to ease prison transition, I think it's important to put an asterisk on that, because nothing that we can do is anything better than just a Band-Aid, because the entire system itself is fruit from a poison tree.
Right.
So anything we do on the ass end of the prison system is just a Band-Aid. That's it.
Well,
right.
An issue with that I'm coming across lately is that we have a lot of aging and elderly felons that are getting ready to go into assisted living. And we do have one person that takes assisted living people because she has a home built for that here in King County, but she only has so much room. So the U.S. government needs to change their policy on low-income housing and allow all felons to live in low-income housing. That is the issue that I'm coming across, is that all these people qualify for low-income housing. They're all elderly, they're disabled, and they're going to end up homeless. And that's what I'm very worried about. So that's a big thing I believe the U.S. government needs to address.
Absolutely. Even in one of the most quote unquote progressive places in the world, Seattle, they're not allowed to discriminate against you for your housing based on your criminal history, unless you're a sex offender, and then they can. It's like, okay, so you think it's just a good idea to have a lot of homeless sex offenders? That doesn't make any sense. Like, who thinks
Right.
that's a good
It's
idea?
really counterproductive.
That's ridiculous, right? So if you've got a felony, they can't discriminate. But if you have some felonies, yes, they can. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense.
When I was at the last Friday talking to Senator Claire Wilson, and I told her, I said, oppression is alive and it's right here in your backyard. I was like, you guys need to take a look at what's going on with people with sex offenses and really take a different look at that, because, it's definitely it's oppressed people.
Yeah, no, I agree. A lot of times when people think about sex offenders, they think about like a serial killer slash rapist kinds of category, but the vast majority of sex offenders are often, I think the public is unaware of how quickly, you can land on the sex offender list.
Yeah. If it were difficult, it wouldn't be so long.
Correct.
Right. I mean, a lot of people are, one drunken night away from possibly landing, right? On that list. And I think that's one of the most misunderstood aspects of that registry.
Oh, yeah. It costs so many people so much, especially here in Washington State, too, because everybody's quick to do a background check and boom, there it comes. And so they lose their house, apartment, and they lose their friends, and I always tell them, if they were your friends, you wouldn't have lost them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
There is a lot of stigma that surrounds criminality without understanding how these things end up being.
One of he's like, they'd rather have somebody that bashes your door and beats your wife down and steals all your stuff living next door to you than they would a sex offender that did a crime 30 years ago that's been in the community for the last 15 that's done nothing.
Yeah. Right.
I mean that I think one of the kind of the most difficult challenges in society is that we often don't believe that people can change.
Right.
Which is weird because people do change. It's inevitable. People always change.
Right. Well, I mean, change is inevitable, but yeah, there is this kind of like fatality when it comes to like undesirable behaviors that, people never change. And, I think ultimately it's not that people are incapable of change, but they're never given an incentive and a motivation by society to change.
If there's no amount of anything you can do that's ever going to get you a place back in society, what are you supposed to do? Like, where do you draw that line, right? If no matter what you do, you're always going to be outside of society, then,
why bother?
Why bother?
Right.
Yeah.
I felt that way a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Then just be an outlaw outside the law because that's your only chance.
Yeah. Because you're going to be anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, but that is actually, you bring up one of the less talked about issues is, how much the prison system releases like the elderly.
Yes, they do.
Into the, back into society. And oftentimes they're, not in the best of shape. They're no longer able to care for themselves or like, conceivably, realistically, like work full time.
Correct. Yeah. And some
they have almost no options.
Yeah. And they can't go to assisted living because you can't be there as a sex offender. You can't. Yeah. So where do they go? Yeah. So it's real sad and tough and all that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, do they end up, back in prison mostly, or do they end up, staying home?
As long as they don't reoffend, most of them are off DOC. Most of them don't have the lifetime DOC requirement in the state. So most of them are not on DOC. So, they will just become homeless. They could end up at, maybe a shelter somewhere. I don't know. But I don't usually 9 times I never see that happen because usually I get them into somewhere or I find something, but it's few and far between. And these places that I'm finding are packed and filled up. So they're more on. So I'm worried about the next person that comes out and the next person, so. Right. Yeah, it's an issue. And the states in the states getting ready, they're going in session right now. Yesterday, I think was so and the biggest topic on the session this term is going to housing. So that's the biggest topic. And that's why I went and talked to Claire, because she's the whip man for that session. So I talked to her about sex offenders and need for housing for all offenders and more resources. And the state needs to play a bigger role in reentry instead of just saying they have a reentry council and it does nothing. I don't even know who the reentry council is. And I do reentry 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So that tells me that they're not really engaged with reentry as far as doing it. They still board and they just take credit, is what I see.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
It's good that we have Claire Wilson pushing those things. She's got a dog in the fight because she's got family that's incarcerated. So
yeah,
she's going to have to deal with this specific issue. She cannot get around it. So
yeah,
we've kind of gotten to the point in society where everybody at least knows somebody who's been to prison. You can't get away from it. There's nobody that you can run down the street that doesn't know somebody who's been to prison.
If there was one major prevention policy that you could enact in terms of preventing people from getting into prison, what would be your policy individually?
UBI.
What does UBI stand for?
Universal
income.
basic.
Yeah, poverty drives so much of crime, and it's not just like people who think that going out and selling drugs is a viable option, but poverty drives trauma, and trauma drives dysfunction.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You go to any crime category, it doesn't matter. Drug offense, sex offense, you name a crime category, and you will back up far enough to find some intense trauma that was probably related to poverty.
Mm-hmm.
People need money.
Yeah, and I think more community involvement within everything, the judicial system, the corrections, everything. I think more community involvement. It takes a community to raise one person. I think it takes a community to raise somebody that is going through a hard time in their life. So I think the community needs to be involved more with what's going on, and instead of just voting or watching the news and judging.
Yeah, we've kind of built a society where people don't feel like they have any way to participate. It's society tends to be something that happens to us now, and not something that we have any power to shape, because in so many ways we don't.
Yeah, because there is no alternative. I spend time in France because my husband's family comes from there. You see the elections. There's the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the Anarchist Party, the Monarchist Party, the liberal democratic capitalist parties. Here we have two capitalist parties, and they both depend for running on the billions provided by the richest people in the society. So we don't have much choice of someone who's actually looking out for the people who have no money. And so that's the mass of America, or at least 40% of America doesn't have $400 to spend in the worst. I think it's 500. Yeah. In terms of helping them in the worst emergency. So we don't have the democracy that would help us out on this. We don't have people.
One thing you mentioned actually before the recording was the idea of co-ops, and how at least that can at least attempt to try and do something, right? Which is that you can employ people that are coming out of prison, and if you have what was it a particular co-op that you come across, Harriet?
Well,
or was it once in general?
Kim Westcott was a person who worked for the Community Church Society of New York and then other places, but she was trying to set up co-ops for people who recently were released, so that they would have a job, they would have an employer who was one of them, and run by a co-op with cooperative people who are nominated from the ranks of the workers to represent them and make decisions about what to produce, how to produce it, what to do with the money, how to allocate it, and have the power to do that, as well as a place to go. And she was looking for grant money, and last time I checked in with her, she hadn't found enough grant money to set up co-ops. But of course, You need co-ops, and they could be co-ops of home health care workers or other things that are desperately needed.
Yeah, I think it's that idea that maybe if the larger system feels disempowering, that just even trying to create some sort of small-scale democracy at least gives you some sense of power or autonomy or control or something like that.
Yeah, I think it would. And it certainly has. When I visited Mondragon, Spain, which is a city of 104 co-ops, there were no cops. It was amazing.
Wow.
Because, even in the bank, they didn't have all these guards and stuff. I was shocked because no person who's the head of a co-op can get more than 8 times. No official in the whole co-op system can get more than 8 times the salary of the basic worker in the co-op. And they're all elected, and they all can be impeached or, unelected at any time by a popular vote. So you have a sense that people are empowered and want to sustain this society of which they're a part. And I think Americans aren't enough a part of this society and don't feel that they're empowered. And
Americans have a siege mentality.
Not. What?
Americans have a siege mentality.
Right.
Could you explain?
A lot of Americans it's kind of what I call like the gated community mindset, where a lot of American mindset is about keeping the unwashed hordes away. A very exclusionary kind of mindset that's very common in the United States. And I think that's, again, a huge part of trying to counter that is to talk more about how these, the root causes of a lot of these issues.
Yes. Because gated communities are for people who can afford it, that we have, and we're going to keep anyone who doesn't have away from us. There's an awful lot of people who don't have, but who don't have representation either, and would need it.
I sort of feel like the killer's in the house, with that kind of gated community vibe or mindset. That the threat really isn't on the outside in that respect. It's like that like you said, Ikoi, this siege mentality means that you're not really living.
The people that are inside that gated community, the people that live there would be just happy to eat each other alive too. It's like,
it's very Walking Dead.
Right.
Imagery.
Also, they depend on underlings to sustain them. They depend on the people that they employ. And so that their siege mentality, they have to let the people in who serve them because they have the money to be served, because we're all vulnerable. And it's a denial of our interdependence and intervulnerability.
Part 2 of this conversation continues next week, or right now, if you head over to patreon.com/It's Not Just In Your Head. Massive thank you as always to our VIP patrons: Rebecca Johns, Bruce Rogers Vaughan, Alexander Lashley, Sheena Belmas, Seamus O'Connell, Alex Placito, Wig Shaker, and Ethan Spammin.
If you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.